All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of Mic'd Up Outdoor Podcast. I am your host, Josh Tanner, and with me today I have a very, very special guest. But before I introduce him, today is President's Day, and it's just one of those days where we celebrate our heritage and with our presidents. And one of the big heritage things that I consider to be huge here in Michigan, in the hunting world, which that's kind of what this podcast is all about, hunting and fishing, is deer camp. In Michigan, in my opinion, is probably one of the best states in the nation as far as deer camps go. But one of the things that we talk about in today's age is, we're all about, a lot of people are all about quality deer management, shooting big bucks, letting little bucks grow. And, guys sometimes talk about how we, people that are the older generation never was really into deer management. And, we wish that maybe they might have been. But today's guest is going to kind of put a little perspective on that whole, kind of deer management thing in the, back in the days of old. And so today my special guest is actually going to be my father, John. He is 76 years old, and we never really get the perspective from the older generation on deer management. So I thought I'd bring him on today and just kind of give everybody an idea of him growing up and how he saw things and how his generation when it came to deer hunting, how they basically handled themselves. So anyway, Dad, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure.
So let's just start things off. Go ahead, introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you're from, a little bit about yourself and growing up, and we'll jump right into it.
Well, I'm John Tanner. I was born and raised on a small farm in Kalkaska County in 1946. This farm with my father and my mom and 5 sisters, and it was like a gentleman's farm. We always had 2, 3 to 4 head of cattle, a lot of chickens, pigs, ducks, you name it. It was on that farm.
Where was the farm at?
Kalkaska County.
Kalkaska County. Yeah. So northern Michigan. Northern lower Michigan.
It was about 5 miles from the Big Manistee River.
Mm-hmm.
On a place, actually, on the map, they would call it O'Neill Corners.
Mm-hmm.
That was where one of the old logging railroads, back in the logging days, used to cross right at that corner. But our farm was 3/4 of a mile north of that. So, yeah, growing up, I remember I was probably 10 years old. My father would come home from work and have his dinner, and then he'd go do his chores, and he would come back to the house, and he would tell my mom that he was going rabbit hunting. And it always puzzled me at that age, why would my dad go rabbit hunting with a army rifle? Well, shortly after dark, he would show up, walk in the house, and he'd say, "Get the pressure cooker ready, Irene, and I'll be back." So, and I was always intrigued by that, not knowing exactly what was going on. But, he would talk about the government beef back then. He always said we were raised on government beef, corn, and potatoes. So that was our life on a small farm. But to give you a little bit of idea on that, usually the next morning when I would get up, or my sisters, and we'd get ready to go to school, the whole kitchen counter was lined with pint jars, quart jars, sometimes 2-quart jars, full of government beef.
A.K.A. venison.
A.K.A. venison. Now, this started usually around the first part of September. And before gun season opened, actually November 15th, to the end of November, which was the only deer season at that time, there was usually anywhere from 3 to 5 of these government critters that wound up at our house
prior to season.
Prior to November
Yeah.
15th. This occurred through September, October.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this was just done out of necessity.
Oh, pure necessity.
Just to feed the family.
Just to feed the family.
Yeah, right.
And my dad wasn't a greedy person. He was a generous person. We had people that lived around us that wasn't as well off as we were. So sometime during the night, our neighbors might wind up with one of these government beefs on their back porch or in their woodshed. And a couple days afterwards, the neighbor would usually stop by, have a cup of coffee with my dad. And everybody knew what was going on. And he would just tell him, thank you for helping us out.
Yeah.
But that's the way it was back then.
Right, yeah. Was there DNR back then?
Yes.
Yeah, there was.
There was one DNR officer. Back then they called them conservation officers.
Sure.
One guy, and I remember he's well, his name was Charlie Hickey. Charlie was probably 6 foot, probably weighed close to 300 pounds. And he basically would just drive around in his car.
Yeah.
He never bothered anybody.
Right.
But he knew what was going on.
Yeah, kind of maybe just turned a blind eye to it because he knew it wasn't anybody just necessarily doing it just for the fun of shooting something. It was a way of life. Like people, that's how people, survived.
Yes, that's how people lived back then.
Yeah,
like when I said previously, we were raised on government beef, beans, potatoes, whatever we get out of our garden.
Right.
That's the way it was growing up in the late 50s and into the early 60s.
Yeah. What did your dad do for a living?
He, for a while, he worked on the ore boats on the Great Lakes with my uncle. But then he quit that and came back to Kalkaska. And he went to work at a little fabricating company right in the town of Kalkaska. It was called Wayne Wire Cloth.
Okay.
At that time. And actually, that's where he retired
from.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about Grandma? Did she work?
Off and on.
Yeah.
She used to, in the summertime, her and her sister, and actually 2 of my sisters, would work in Traverse City in the summertime processing cherries when the cherries came in season. And then later in years, she worked at a small factory in the little town of Mansalona called Mansalona Iron Works.
Yeah.
She would work a night shift there.
Okay.
But yeah, that's
the long and short of it, huh?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know that back in the day, we had a brief conversation about deer season, and you were telling me some stories about deer season in the town of Kalkaska and everything, and maybe you can kind of go into detail about what the towns in the north look like around deer seasons. Because so going back into it, just to kind of preface it, deer season was only November 1st through November. November 15th through the 30th.
Yes, November 15th to the end of the month.
Okay, and there was no bow season.
There was no bow season.
Was anybody bow hunting at the time?
Not that I can remember.
Nobody that you knew of anyway.
No. Well, the neighbors, they used just the old common, wasn't even a recurve.
Right.
I don't even know what you called them back then.
Right.
Some of them were handmade.
Yeah, sure.
And then later in years, Bear Archery.
Yep.
Fred Bear.
Yeah, Fred Bear. Right there in Grayling.
In Grayling.
Yep.
And, of course, the recurve.
Basically was born.
Yeah. And I can't even remember when the bow season actually started in the state.
Yeah.
But back in those days, in the early 60s, like, again, one season, November 15th to the end of the month, there was no doe season. It was strictly bucks.
Yep.
And
one deer limit.
One deer limit.
One tag, one deer. That was it.
One tag, one deer.
For your entire year. Per person.
Yes.
And it didn't matter. No. So you said there was no doe season, but with that one tag, you could shoot whatever you wanted?
No.
It
had to be a buck.
It had to be a buck.
A 3-inch horn.
Okay.
They had to have 3 inches. And believe me, there was a lot of guys that thought that they had shot a water buffalo and he only had horns about 3-4 inches long. Those days in Kalkaska, let's say deer season started on a Thursday or a Friday.
Yeah.
Come Friday night and Saturday, the little downtown of Kalkaska would almost double in size. All you would see up and down the streets was all these hunters in those big wool hunting coats, the red and black plaid with the red and black hunting pants,
Sure.
leather boots, and those big 5-buckle Arctics.
Yeah.
And the big muffed ear hats
Yeah.
that would pull down over your ears.
Kind of like what we were talking about as far as like if you've ever seen the movie Grumpy Old Men.
Yes,
That's kind of what those guys.
That's
kind of
what
what
you saw.
everybody looked like.
Yep, and they acted like it.
And they were grumpy old men.
I was, as I said earlier, they were in that town. The main street was 1 city block long. Stores were on one side. Anybody that's been into Kalkaska knows exactly what I'm talking about. But there was a bar about in the middle of the main street and a hotel at the end. And during that 14 days of deer season, the bar and the hotel probably made enough money to support them the whole year.
The entire year.
It was just flooded with hunters.
Yeah. Downstate hunters, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Everybody
90% of them were from downstate.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the main business back then? Everybody in downstate was probably automotive industry.
Mostly automotive workers.
Yeah.
A lot of people back then came up from Grand Rapids from the furniture factories.
Okay. Yeah.
But primarily the people that come north were auto workers or
Right.
iron workers.
Sure. And were they landowners or was it all pretty much state ground?
Some of them owned land. Some of them had their own vertical log cabins that they used for hunting camps.
Yeah.
Some come up with tents, and of course, the majority of that county was state land.
Right.
So that's where most of them hunted.
Right.
And you could hunt anywhere on the state land up there.
Right. And just to kind of give detail for people listening, the area up there is not it's not agricultural land.
Some of it.
Some of it.
Yeah. Probably, I'm going to say roughly a third.
Yeah. Yeah.
The rest of Kalkaska County is lowland, rolling hills, hardwoods,
Right.
swampy areas.
Yeah.
I believe if you could go back into history and check the name of Kalkaska, and I believe it was it derived from the Chippewa language,
Okay.
and it meant swampland
Okay.
or lowland.
Yeah.
And of course, the Manistee River runs right almost diagonally
Sure.
through that county.
Yeah.
A lot of lowland,
Yeah.
and back then, lots of deer.
Yeah.
There was nothing that. When I got my driver's license and I was able to go out, we had a spotlight, and me and 2-3 of my buddies would go out in the early fall and go shine the fields at the farmers all that was around us. There were several potato farmers, several dairy farms.
Yeah.
We'd shine their fields just about on any given night, and you could see anywhere from 200 to 300 deer.
Yeah. So you didn't have to be 16 to get your license back then? Was that the 14? 14. So
14.
So yeah, so you were driving a car at 14 years old.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I had my own car at 14.
Yeah.
A 1954 Hudson Hornet.
So when did you start actually hunting? Not necessarily deer hunting, but when did you start hunting?
When I was 12.
12 years old.
My dad had I believe it was a Marlin.
Mm-hmm.
It was a 22 automatic, and all it would shoot was shorts.
Okay.
Not long rifle or anything. It's just
Sure.
a short.
Right.
And I would use that mostly for rabbit hunting.
Okay.
And there, a mile south of where I was raised, was what they called the O'Neill Swamp. And I would walk down into that swamp into the fall when the snow was on.
Right.
And that's where I'd go and do my rabbit hunting.
Yeah.
I never had a dog.
Lots of snow back then.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yeah. Way more than what we get nowadays.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Like-
I would be clear to my backside in
Right.
snow,
Right. Yeah.
traipsing through that swamp.
Yeah.
I didn't go very far. I usually just sit down
Just
where
wait.
I saw a lot of rabbit tracks and wait for them.
Just wait for them to come through.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd drag 3, 4, 5 rabbits back home with me. And my mother would, she would help butcher them out, clean them out.
Yeah.
And we'd make rabbit stew.
Rabbit stew.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Then when I was, I used my dad's, he had a double barrel 12 gauge. And of course, I probably was 13 men maybe.
Yeah.
And I used to use that rabbit hunting. The first time I shot it, I accidentally pulled both triggers and it knocked me right on my butt. So I learned a pretty good lesson right there.
Sure.
Don't pull both triggers.
Don't pull both triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
And then when, when I turned 14, that's when you could buy a deer license.
Yeah.
And back then, the licenses were that long.
Yeah, probably what, 8 to 10 inches
Yes.
long by probably 4 inches tall.
3.
4 inches tall.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they were made out of a heavy material that was like waterproof.
Yeah.
And we would use safety pins
Yeah.
and pin them on everybody's back.
You had to display them on your back or somewhere on the back of your on your jacket.
Yes.
So hunter's orange was not at that time required, correct? It was
absolutely not.
Could it be any? It didn't matter what you wear.
No, it had to be red and black.
Red and black.
That was primarily the. I think it was 80% red, 20% black.
Yeah. So
it was the old.
Yeah, it's that kind of the old plaid, black plaid or red plaid that wool that everybody wore. I mean,
heavier than the dickens.
Sure.
In fact, I still have one of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It belonged to your mother's grandpa.
Okay.
He gave that to me, I believe, probably 68, 69, somewhere in there. So that jacket that I have is close to 100 years old, if not that.
Really?
Yeah.
And that stuff is just...
It's still in good shape.
Yeah, it's still in good shape. But that old wool, I mean, it's heavy. Like I could compared to the stuff nowadays. I mean, that thing's like a boat anchor.
Just about.
But like that was the
the
premium blend back then, and I mean, it necessarily wasn't was it waterproof? You just basically
primarily, they would shed water pretty good.
Yeah.
But if you were out in the weather for very long, they would start leaking through.
Yeah, once they got wet, they were even more heavy.
Like, like a sponge.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But when I turned 14, I had my first deer license, and I used that. My father bought me a 410. It was a Montgomery Ward's Western Field 3-shot bolt action 410 shotgun, and I hunted deer with slugs.
Yeah.
The first one I shot with that was in the O'Neill Swamp.
Okay.
I was walking through there on some high ground, and I was coming into a marshy area that probably covered maybe 150 square feet or bigger than that in circumference.
Yeah.
And I was walking straight through that.
Yeah. No, did you always go by yourself?
90% of the time.
90% of the time.
Yes.
14 years old.
14 years old. Yep. I had a couple of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches on me and a glass of some container, probably a pint jar.
Yeah.
With water.
Yeah.
And my hunting knife.
And
my shotgun.
Yeah.
But that first buck I shot, he jumped up, him and 2 does, jumped up in front of me. I pulled up and aimed for he was facing directly at me.
No scope.
No scope.
Iron sight.
Wasn't even sights on him.
Just
a front bead.
Just a front bead right on the front of the barrel or end of the barrel at the end.
End on at the end of the barrel.
Yeah.
I pulled up, shot, and that deer dropped right there. And I got up to it, looked at it. I lifted its head up, and I had shot it right in that triangular white spot.
Yeah, right in the throat patch, the white
just
throat
below
patch.
his jaw.
Yeah. Were you aiming there?
Pardon me?
Were you aiming there?
No, I was aiming wherever I could hit. But
What was that, like an opening day type thing, or was that more
I
so?
believe that was around Thanksgiving.
Okay.
And it was on a weekend.
Okay.
And I think that was a Thanksgiving weekend.
Okay.
I told my mom and dad I'm going to O'Neill Swamp.
Right. How far was the swamp away from the house?
3/4 of a mile.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that swamp, well, it covered the area that I hunted in was probably 40 acres,
Yeah.
but it adjoined other private land and state land.
Yeah.
Huge swamp.
Okay.
It was a big swamp.
Yeah. Sections worth.
Oh yeah.
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 For sure.
And there was a creek that run through part of it. That was called the Pearson Creek.
Yeah.
That was my summer trout fishing.
Yeah, and that
rendezvous.
property had been in the family since
For years.
since our family basically moved into Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah.
That land was originally owned by my great-grandfather,
Okay.
who came to Kalkaska County from down around Holland,
Okay.
Michigan. And he settled up there. He settled on a 40-acre plot down in a place they called it the Sheltsky place.
Mm-hmm.
It was about 3 miles south of where I grew up.
Okay.
And then, because it was mostly swampy land, he moved up north to this high ground to where our family farm
Right.
is today.
Still.
It was at one time he owned that entire section.
Yeah.
And he gave each of his daughters, he gave 40 acres to them.
Okay.
But since that time, most of them has been sold
off. Sure.
This farm that I'm referring to was the O'Neill farm.
Yeah.
That was owned by my step-grandfather
Okay.
and my grandma.
All right.
And they farmed that. But
Yeah.
I hunted that O'Neill swamp, well, as far back as I can remember.
As far as you can remember, sure. Yeah. So that first deer you shot, it was a buck?
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a little forkhorn.
Little forkhorn.
Yeah, like
Yeah. And you
probably about that tall.
Michigan 4-point.
Yes. Yeah. And I thought I'd shot a 30-point buck.
Sure, biggest dang thing in the county.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah. So after you shot that deer, had you ever got a deer before?
Never in my life.
Never in your life?
I saw my dad gut one.
Sure.
So
there was no YouTube. There was nobody that's standing there to say, do this, do that.
No.
It was all basically just whatever you thought was right at the time.
proper way to
Yeah.
Well, by the time I got that deer done, he was cut from ear hole to ass.
Sure.
And I got it. I opened him up and I remember running that knife in and I hit the stomach. And,
Sure.
And you know what happens.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The
the
smell. It all
smell.
comes out.
Did you get sick?
stench. Of course, I'm gagging and choking. But I finally did the duty and I got him all cleaned out. And I started dragging him towards home. Well, from where I shot that deer to my parents' house was at least a mile. There was an old railroad grade that ran down through there, and
Yeah.
I drug him most of that distance out to the road, and then I walked on home.
Yeah.
And of course, my mom's in the kitchen, and I opened the door and I walked in, and my mom turned around, and I'm blood from head to foot. She's screaming. She thought I shot myself
Sure.
or something, and I thought she was going to pass out, but I got her calmed down, told her I had a deer,
Yeah.
and
What kind of knife did you have? Was it like a lock blade or was it a fixed blade?
the knife was called Hawthorne.
Okay.
It was bought from Montgomery Ward's,
Okay.
and it had a curved, probably a 5-inch blade on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you've seen it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure I have. At the time, Montgomery Ward was like the Amazon of today.
In
like
Traverse City.
You bought everything from
Yes.
Montgomery Ward.
Yes. You bought your clothes. You bought your tires, your clothes, your appliances, and my 410 shotgun.
Yeah.
And my hunting knife.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Everything and anything was bought from Montgomery Ward. It's kind of ironic that, Montgomery Ward hasn't been around for, oh man, I can't even remember when the last time I'd seen anything. It's got to be
late 60s,
I was
probably.
just going to say, yeah.
I believe.
Yeah. It's kind of ironic, but yeah. So anyway, you got home, your mom was kind of flipping out over your deer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Once you calmed her down, she realized that
Everything was good.
Yeah, you shot it. So what'd you do after that? How did you get it home? Because, it was a long ways away at that point, right?
Yeah. Well, my mom she said, well, where is it? And I said, well, it's down in the swamp on the railroad grade.
Yeah.
Well, let's go get it.
Yeah.
So my mom, she still has her dress on and her apron.
Yeah.
I can remember it like it happened yesterday.
Yeah. And mind you, she was a very petite woman.
Oh, yeah.
She couldn't have been, 100 pounds soaking wet?
Maybe 110,
Yeah.
150.
Yeah. Probably about
5'3".
Yeah. Yeah. But meaner than a hornet.
Oh, meaner than a snake. She could, yeah. God bless her.
That's funny.
But anyway, we had a black and white 55 Chevy Bel Air at that time. So we got in the car. I had to clean up. I had blood all over.
Right. Was it just you and her that were home?
At that time.
Yeah.
My dad had gone hunting.
Yeah, okay.
So my mom was home by her. Well, my sisters were there.
Yeah.
My older sisters.
Right.
My youngest sister hadn't even been born yet.
Right.
Yes, she was. She would have. Yeah, she probably would have been 3, 4.
Okay.
But my mom and I drove down there, or she drove, and we pulled into. There was a gate there alongside the road, and you could walk right in and go down to that railroad grade.
Yeah.
Well, being the wise guy that I was, I figured I got to cover this deer up so nobody can find it and steal it. Well,
what was the temperatures? I mean, what was you said around Thanksgiving?
Yeah, I believe it was Thanksgiving weekend. I think there was 10, 12 inches of snow on it.
Okay. Yeah.
And the temperature was still, it was freezing, 30 to 32 degrees, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
And we only walked, I don't know, 20 yards down that railroad grade.
Yeah.
And I said, I told my mom, it's right there. She says, where? I said, underneath that pile. It's brush. I threw
a bunch of brush.
Yeah, cedar boughs.
Yeah.
Covered it up. She looked at me like, are you nuts? So I had to cover it up, Mom, so nobody'd steal it. So, and she helped me drag it.
Was there other people around hunting at the time? Or
not there.
Not there. Yeah.
Not in that area,
Yeah.
no. Well, in the area, but
that was that private ground though? That was your ground though.
That belonged to my step-grandpa.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
He hunted that, but he was an old man back then.
Right.
He hunted down in that swamp. He had a little spot down in there that he'd cleared out.
Mm-hmm.
He cleared a path down through the swamp, probably 10 foot wide, 50 yards long.
Yeah.
He'd sit at the end of it and wait for the
Just
deer
wait
to cross.
for the deer to cross. Yeah. Yeah.
He fired a .358 Winchester rifle.
Okay.
I think it was a lever action gun. I always wanted that gun.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. But yeah, we threw that deer in the trunk of the car, took it home, and drug it out to the barn, and I started processing it.
Yeah. Still didn't know what the hell you were doing.
Still didn't know what I was doing. I had it hung up by its neck, and I started right where the rope was up in here. And I cut all the way around and just cut down, and I started peeling the hide off him.
Yeah.
And then later, it was dark. My dad finally come home, and my mother told him that I had that deer out there, so he come out and just grinning from ear to ear.
Sure. Yeah.
And he finished it up. He quartered it out. And back then, we just put the meat in a big wash tub.
Yeah.
The old hand wash tubs.
Right.
Galvanized steel. Put water in there, and the deer he'd leave him in there for a day or two.
Yeah.
And then...
of course, it was plenty cold enough.
Oh, gosh, yes. Yeah, back then. Well, we had we called it the pump house. And it was an area about, I believe, probably 12 foot square.
Yeah.
And that's where our pump was, down in that cellar.
Okay.
And that's where you put a lot of our winter canned goods.
Okay.
And he'd put that meat down in there.
Yeah.
And then he would bring it out and take it in the house and
process it
out.
Yeah.
And, of course, there would be my mother again with her pressure cooker.
Yeah. Were you guys canning everything?
Oh, yeah.
Everything canned.
You didn't have refrigerators or freezers back then. We had a refrigerator, but the ice box in it probably was, about like this.
Yeah. Not big.
No, not big.
Yeah.
Back then, you canned everything.
Right.
Fruits, vegetables.
Well, yeah, you had to because you just didn't have any other way of keeping it, well, I guess, good,
No.
So, that's something.
Of course, we would have fresh venison.
Right.
And my dad loved the heart.
Yeah.
He'd slice that heart up, and then he would, I can't remember, I think he boiled it.
Yeah.
And then he would pickle it.
Okay.
So we would have pickled venison heart.
Yeah. Did you guys eat primarily just the heart and the, all the good meat? Or was there any of the other organs that you guys
Liver.
would ever? Liver. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Liver and onions.
Yeah.
My dad loved it.
Nothing went to waste.
Oh, no.
No. That was just didn't happen.
No, what was wasted, well, it wasn't even waste. It was just bone.
Yeah.
Hooves, bone, ribs.
Yeah. Not edible.
Yeah. If it was, that's about what went out.
Yeah.
Was whatever was not edible.
That's crazy.
My mother would take the ribs sometimes and make them like spare ribs.
Yeah.
There wasn't much meat, much meat on them.
Right.
But she would do that.
Yeah. So it was basically, did any of your sisters hunt?
Yes. My one sister, her name was Sharon, and she hunted. Her boyfriend loved to hunt.
Yeah.
So she would hunt with him.
Okay.
I can't even remember what rifle. Well, she used my 410 a couple of times.
Okay.
That's right. I forgot that. But yes, she did. And she shot a deer with it.
Did she? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it was just you and Grandpa and maybe your sister Sharon that were hunting, I mean, 3 deer. I mean, because you could only shoot one
If you were lucky.
Legally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If you were lucky.
Yeah. So I guess we were talking earlier about how town basically it just grew, 3-4 times as many people, the population and stuff. And you said a lot of the hunters would come up from downstate and stuff. And I mean, I guess tell us a little bit about, some of the stories and things that you saw growing up.
We'd go into town. Everybody went to town on a Saturday.
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, to buy groceries and do whatever.
Sure.
And a lot of those hunters would be in that town. Well, if one of them would shoot a deer, they would throw it on the hood of their car.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, you got to remember, 55 Chevys, 57
huge
Chevys.
cars.
Yeah, 58 Chevys, and then into the 60s.
Sure.
I remember one guy distinctly that he had a 60 Chevy Impala.
Mm-hmm.
It was white with a red interior in it. He had that deer laying right across the entire hood up against the windshield. And he was gawking, showing off this animal that probably was a 6-point.
Yeah. Driving around town, you
Driving right down through Main Street in Kalkaska, which at that time was US 131.
Okay.
Well, he's looking around. He had his buddies in there, and somebody stopped in front of him. He slammed on the brakes, and that deer went right off the hood on the ground, slid right down the street in front of everybody. And the people on the street are just laughing and yelling, crazy.
Yeah.
And these guys stop in the middle of 131.
Yeah.
They bail out of the car and they grab the deer, throw it back on the hood, and away they went.
That never had it tied down or anything? Just
they did, but
kind of did.
It was probably like a clothesline rope.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that was.
Broke.
I wish I had a camera back then. It was some wild stuff.
Oh, that's crazy.
And another thing I forgot to. Well, when we were discussing it, there was a guy and his buddy. They got pretty liquored up in the bar.
Okay.
Well, they had a deer out in their car.
Yeah.
In the trunk, I believe.
Yeah.
While I didn't witness this, everybody heard it.
Sure.
They took that deer out of that trunk and drug it right into the bar. And set it on one of the tables.
Just showing it off?
Just showing it off.
What was it? How big?
It was a little buck. I think people said it was a 6-point, something like that. But it wasn't a very big deer.
Yeah, and these were trophies.
Oh, yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, back then, if you had a 6-point buck, you...
Right. I mean, like a 100-inch buck in Michigan, it was a solid buck. But these are smaller than that.
Chances are, back then... If you got a 2.5-year-old buck, that was an old buck.
Yeah. So that not much has changed.
No.
From now, a 2.5-year-old in Michigan is still, a relatively not old deer, but that's the standard.
Now I'm sure there were some huge bucks shot back then.
Yeah.
I never saw anything bigger than a 10-point.
Yeah.
An 8-point buck was a big deer back
Right.
then.
That got the whole town riled
Oh, yeah.
up.
And if they weighed 165 pounds, that was a big deer.
I'll be damned.
Well, you got to remember, back then, the winters were much more severe.
Sure.
And the deer suffered a lot in the winter.
Yeah.
I remember in the springtime, the DNR would they would go to Camp Grayling, I think it was, and it was a prison camp.
Yeah.
And they would take them prisoners into these swamps, and they would cut cedar trees down for the deer to eat in the spring.
Really?
Yeah, the deer were actually starving.
Yeah.
These guys, and I did witness this, these guys would be with a chainsaw cutting these trees down, and as fast as they cut them down, the deer were right there eating.
Really?
You're cutting a deer with a chainsaw, and there's a deer 10 foot away from you eating the boughs.
So deer numbers were high.
A lot of deer.
But quality was not.
No.
You know. I mean, I'm sure there was big bucks places, but
Yes.
Yeah. Did it any, like, I guess at the time, like, was the UP kind of the place to go to shoot a big buck?
Yes.
Yeah.
Primarily.
Yeah.
Or downstate.
Or downstate. Still
in the
downstate.
southern counties.
Yeah.
In the Corn Belt.
Yeah.
Of the-
Definitely more ag down there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that still holds true today. Well, downstate, yes. Maybe not so much the UP. The UP's, well, seen a lot of changes over the years in the deer numbers and
Now,
stuff,
these days, current days, the deer herd in the Upper Peninsula is suffering
Yeah.
from the wolf population.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's something. So when we were talking earlier, you were telling me about how a lot of these guys would come into town and they would find deer just left. Like
Well, they would have buck poles.
Yeah.
They had one in Kalkaska. There was one up in the town north of us, Mansalona.
Yeah.
And then there was a couple of bars that were outside of town that had buck poles. And these guys would shoot these deer, and they'd hang them up on them buck poles, and they'd leave them there 4 or 5 days. Well, the meat's rotted. If you get a warm spell,
Yeah.
the meat would rot. And I can remember going to the city dump outside of Kalkaska, and it was not uncommon during deer season or there in that period of time. Yeah. You could see 50, 60 dead deer piled up out there. They were rotted.
That's
They
crazy.
just throw them away. Took their heads off them, or the horns.
Yeah.
And
Just the value of them meat wise was
bad. No.
they didn't care.
Uh-uh.
Yeah, that's sad. That's sad. Interesting. So what's the biggest buck you've ever shot?
Michigan buck?
Yeah.
That would have been 8-point that I shot in the Pigeon River State Forest.
You and me? That's the
Yeah.
biggest one?
No, you weren't with me when I shot this.
I was with you when you shot the one that you've got mounted, which is
Yes.
probably about 120
Yes.
inch buck.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I shot another buck up there.
Okay. So once you grew up, you moved,
Yes.
or we moved. You moved. So moved up to Gaylord.
Yes.
Okay.
Lived in Gaylord, and I hunted in the Pigeon River State Forest,
right.
out where the elk herd is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I used to go back to Kalkaska on occasion,
Yeah.
and I would hunt in that O'Neill Swamp or
Right.
behind my mom and dad's house on the neighbor's property.
Yeah.
Back then, everybody knew everybody.
Right.
And you had permission to go hunt on the neighbor's property.
Yeah. It wasn't nothing like it is
Nothing
today.
like it is now.
It was okay for you to technically trespass because
Yeah.
families were a lot closer to other families back then. Or I mean, I'm sure there was probably some things that weren't that way, but
It was the old days. Everybody took care of everybody
yeah,
else.
yeah,
Yeah. I used to hunt on our neighbor's property at least once or twice during deer season. Of course, most of the time I was hunting with the neighbors.
right,
We would get 8-10 people,
yeah.
and 3 of us would drive.
Do deer drives. Was that pretty common? You guys did a lot of deer drives.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back
Yeah.
in the 60s.
Yeah,
60, when I was 14, that's when I started doing that with the neighbors. The neighbors' brothers would come up from the Detroit area.
Mm-hmm.
They were steel workers and
Okay.
auto workers.
Yeah.
They would come up there and spend deer season there at that farm.
Yeah.
And we had 8 to 10 people there.
Yeah.
And we'd put on drives on all of their property
Right.
and half of everybody else's property.
Sure.
Nobody cared.
Yeah.
I mean, if for example, if one of the guys shot a deer on the O'Neill property,
Yeah.
they would offer my step-grandpa a hind quarter off that
Okay.
deer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way it was.
Just as payment for thanks for letting me hunt
Thanks
your
for letting me
property.
hunt your property.
Yeah. Oh man, it's come a
And
long ways.
it was nothing to shoot 3-inch spikes.
Spikes. Yeah.
Lots of them. Lots of them.
Yeah.
Year-old fawns.
Was there ever talk when you were growing up about passing bucks up to shoot, something bigger than what maybe you've shot before?
Not that I recall.
No, it was
If
never.
it had horns, it was going down.
Yeah, it was. There was never a deer management or I want to shoot a.
No.
Yeah, it just the only way you were shooting a bigger buck is just by chance that you came across it.
That's just
Yeah.
pure chance.
Yeah. So.
Now you have to remember back then, one tag.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, you pass up a buck. Well, that might be the only buck you see
that
the
very
entire
well could
season.
be the only buck you'd see that
Yeah,
year.
because now, we have early doe season in, I think, the end of September. Bow season starts October 1st, and goes till November 15th. And then you have deer season that goes from November 15th to the end of November. And then you have muzzleloader, and then you have bow season starting again, and all the way through, basically from
October 1st,
October 1st till,
the end
even,
of December.
Well, even in now, there's even doe seasons in special, in certain counties into January.
Yes.
So, deer season is
Also,
long.
you got to remember now there's youth hunts.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, you have hunts that start in towards the end of September.
Yes.
Youth hunts. I think there's like a disabled hunt or something.
Yes.
Yes. Something like that. So, how much was a tag? How much was a deer tag?
Oh gosh, I think seems to me it was $3.
$3.
When I was 14, I think that's what a license tag was.
Yeah. Did you ever see guys come from out of state to come
Rare.
hunt in Michigan?
Very rare.
Rare. Yeah.
Rare.
You'd have to be probably a pretty wealthy person to
Yes.
to even make a move out of state to deer hunt at that time, I imagine. So now, everybody,
a lot of the people back in those days came from that area.
Yeah.
And when they grew up and got married, they moved away down to the cities.
Yeah, where the jobs were.
Yeah. And they would come back to Kalkaska County or Grayling area, Crawford County, Mansalona, and Antrim County, Grand Traverse County.
Was it people came up to hunt up there just because of the vast amount of state land?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, there was a lot of deer up there too.
Oh, okay. Okay.
At that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And most of the deer that were up there were around farmers.
Yeah.
That's where they basically got their food source.
Yeah. So today, obviously I learned a ton from you, and you taught a ton of my friends how to hunt and primarily gun hunt, but just hunt general, woodsmanship in general. How much did wind play, a role in when you hunted?
Well, my dad taught me how to hunt.
Okay.
He taught me how to track deer.
Okay.
He was like an Indian.
Sure.
If he shot a deer, he could find that blood trail like nobody else could.
Really?
Yeah. I was amazed by that.
Yeah.
And I learned by that.
Yeah.
You look for blades of grass.
Sure.
The old ferns.
Right.
That are, brown in the wintertime.
Right.
You'd look for a speck of blood no bigger than a BB.
Right. Right.
And
He
that man could hunt.
He was a good tracker.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. People would call him that had downed a deer but couldn't find it.
Yeah.
So he'd go help him track it.
He just had a knack for it.
He had a knack for it.
I'll be damned.
Yeah. And he taught me, I mean, right up front, gun safety, gun safety, gun safety.
Sure.
Don't you ever point a gun at anybody.
Yeah.
Your gun barrel is either up or down.
Right.
And always on safety. He didn't have a problem with a round in the chamber.
Sure.
But it had to be on safety.
Right.
And pointing to the ground or pointing in the air.
Yeah.
That was it.
The gun was loaded whether it was loaded or not. You
Correct.
treated it as if
Yes.
it was always loaded.
Yes.
Yeah.
He taught me how to, after my first deer, he taught me how to properly gut a
deer.
Yes. Oh, I could tell some stories about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess when you got into your teenage years, primarily you were doing deer drives and stuff like that. I guess tell me your favorite one of your favorite hunting stories.
Legal or illegal?
Well, I mean, let's go with legal for this one.
Well, I didn't get this deer, but my brother-in-law,
Okay.
Ed,
Okay.
he never hunted in his life, but he always wanted to.
Yeah.
So I told him, you come to our house, and we're going to go back on our neighbor's property, and one of their boys is going to go with us.
Yeah. How old were you guys at the time?
I was out of the service.
You were out of the service.
So
Okay.
that would have been probably 69,
Okay. Okay.
69, maybe 70.
Okay.
But the neighbor and I told him ahead of time that my brother-in-law was going to come to the house, and
Yeah.
would he help us go back on his property?
Right.
And him and I were going to drive a wooded section, probably 10, 15 acres.
Yeah.
And we put my Ed out in the field at the south end of that.
Okay.
And the neighbor and I drove north to south. Well, we were almost through the woods when the shooting started.
Yeah. What gun did he have?
He had in fact, I have that gun. It was a 30-06 pump.
Okay.
What they call them? A 760, I think.
Okay.
That belonged to his father. Well, it had a scope on it. But he started shooting at that deer until he ran out of...
Ran out of bullets in the clip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that deer's stumbling. He hit it 2-3 times.
Yeah.
And it would fall down, get up, and run some more. And he's trying to put another clip in
Yeah.
it. So by that time, my buddy and I are through the woods out there with him.
Right.
And he's shaking like...
Shaking
all
like
excited.
a leaf. Sure. Yeah. First deer, right? First deer.
First deer he'd
Was
ever
it-
shot in his
I'm
life.
assuming it was a buck.
Yes.
Because this was still one license.
Correct.
Okay.
This buck was, if I recall, was a 6-point.
Yeah.
In fact, he had one tine broke off.
Okay.
On the brow. Yeah, I think the brow tine.
Okay.
But I said, where's the deer? He said, it's over there. And he's pointing across the hayfield.
Yeah.
Well, there's the deer all piled up 200 yards away.
Yeah.
So we start after it, walking towards it.
Right.
It's laying there. We got within, 50 feet of it.
Yeah.
It jumps up, ran through the fence, and went right between the buildings at my stepfather's farm,
Okay.
between the barn and a corn shed, and laid down in there. So I jumped through the fence, and I went over there and finished it off.
Yeah.
And then I drug it back into the field.
He was out of bullets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's out of bullets, holding his gun.
Yeah.
Well, here's the deer laying there, and my aunt showed up. Of course, we were shooting real close to the barn.
Sure.
Well, that barn was full of Hereford cattle.
Oh no.
She was pretty excited over
Yeah.
that deal, but I got her calmed down, told her don't worry about it, everything's fine.
Yeah.
So now we're back out and we're going to gut this deer out. So I tell my brother-in-law, and I poke my neighbor in the arms or in the ribs to get his attention. And I said,
Yeah.
now, Ed, this is your first deer, right? Yeah. I handed him my knife. I said, well, it's your job. You got to gut this deer.
Right.
Now, the first thing you do is, you know where I'm going with this.
Yeah, I think so.
You got to cut the gonads off. And once you've done that, being your first deer, you have to bite the sack.
It's tradition, right?
It's tradition. Long live the tradition.
Right.
My neighbor, Orrin, at this time, he kind of hard to keep from laughing.
Sure.
So Ed, he's got a weak stomach. He gets that sack about this up to here. And he starts gagging and choking and throwing up. And he just went like this with that sack and the way they went.
Tossed it.
By this time, my neighbor's on the ground, just rolling, laughing. His tears. Well, finally, this Ed, he figured out what's going on.
Yeah, he knew.
After that was over, he didn't talk to me for 3 months. But that was the story. And then Orrin and I, we wound up gutting the deer.
Did
for
you?
him.
Yeah,
But,
he was so mad.
He was so mad. He was furious. But like I said, he wouldn't talk to me for 3 months over that. Well, I let the story out.
Sure.
That was funny.
Yeah.
So, and everybody teased that man to death.
Yeah.
About, did you bite the sack, Ed? And
Oh man.
he gave me that rifle.
Yeah.
He stopped. He quit hunting and
Sure.
called me up one day and he said, "Come on over. I got something for you."
Yeah.
Well, he gave me that rifle and a shotgun and a 22.
Yeah.
He didn't want nothing to do with hunting anymore.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Now that was years later, but
Yeah.
that was the funniest hunt.
Sure. You never bow hunted.
Never.
Never.
Well, yes, I did. I hunted with you out in Missouri that one.
Oh,
year.
that's right. Yep. That's right. I set you up with a youth bow that I had. And
Yes.
Yeah. That was the first time you had ever bow hunted.
First and only time.
Jeez, oh Pete, you were 60,
Yeah.
probably, maybe mid.
Well, I'm
mid-
76.
You
That would
were
have been.
you were retired at the time, so
Yeah.
wow, I never knew that. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a bow.
Yeah.
It came from Bear Archery. It was a reject.
Okay.
And a friend of mine worked at Bear Archery, and he was able to take those rejects.
Okay.
It was a recurve bow that had broke right at where the upper curve on it.
Okay.
That snapped off.
Okay.
Well, he cut them off top and bottom, and then put the groove in it for the string.
So it was just a shorter bow,
Yeah, it
probably
was
more
about
poundage.
that long.
Yeah, harder to pull. But
It was a Bear bow,
Yeah.
but my Lord, you needed a come along to pull it back.
Sure. Yeah.
so
Yeah. You
short.
could probably hardly even get it.
Oh, yeah.
Drawn back to what
Yeah.
you needed to. Wow,
In
that's
fact-
something.
I could tell you a story about that. My cousin Jack
Okay.
and other kids at our school.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is in grade school. I was in the 8th grade. All of us, 5 or 6 of us kids, had a bow of some sort,
Sure.
and we're target practicing down at our school. And my cousin Jack is standing right behind me watching what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled that bow back, the string broke, and I went like this right in his jaw
Oh,
with my elbow.
no.
Knocked him right down.
All that pressure.
Blood poured.
Oh, that's great.
The good old days.
Yeah, sure. Stories for sure. So, tell me about your most favorite hunt.
My most
White,
favorite hunt
yeah, your most favorite whitetail hunt.
in Michigan.
It doesn't
Well,
have
it was
to,
in Michigan.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
The one that I shot with you.
Yeah,
That was my favorite of all.
that was my first year ever being able to go to deer camp in
Yes.
the Pigeon River.
Yes.
And I remember that I think I was 12 years old because at the time you couldn't rifle hunt until you were 14.
Correct.
Or I couldn't.
Correct.
So, yeah, I remember there must have been 12, 14 guys in camp.
I think there was.
Yeah.
I think there was at least 12 that year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, that was pretty amazing how we pulled that off. I mean, with everybody. I mean, there was, if I remember, I mean, I know you used to go to deer camp long before I ever did, and I remember you always told us stories about guys coming in with buses, and
There was an old fella that come
Yeah.
in there with an old school bus that
Yeah.
he'd converted into a camp.
right.
Now-
But you guys would take whatever you could get in there.
Oh, yeah.
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 I mean, it was 2 tracks and mud holes and you
Oh, yeah.
name it.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did you, When you started hunting in the Pigeon River, how did you guys find what made you go there, and I guess what made you, the Pigeon River is a huge area. What made you find?
Well, if you remember, we lived in Gaylord.
Yep.
And across the street, our neighbor,
yeah,
Don Clever.
That's right. I remember that.
He invited me to go out to the Pigeon River with him.
Okay.
And so I said, yeah, I would love to.
Yeah. And he was a bow hunter.
Yes, he did bow hunt later in years. But at that time, he
primarily
had
a gun hunter.
I think he had a Marlin 30-30 that he shot with a scope on it.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I had a BSA bolt action 308 with a 4-power Weaver that I used.
Yep.
And I took your brother out there that year. And he took his son.
Yeah.
And we did a day hunt out there. That was my first experience in the Pigeon River.
Okay.
And I fell in love with that place.
And after that, you started bringing, taking your buddies and
guys that I worked with.
Yeah.
Our original group consisted of 6 guys in an old pop-up camper that I had.
Yeah.
You remember that one?
Yeah.
Old canvas thing.
Yep. Yeah. We used to line it with dowel board.
Yes.
Insulation because it was canvas. I mean, you're in the middle of the winter.
After the second day, it was like a rainforest in there.
It was soaked in there.
Everything was soaked.
Yeah, from the heat, the heat and the condensation and everything. That's crazy. So anyway, back to this story. I remember it. It was awesome. I was 12 years old. But I'll let you tell the story.
Well, I remember telling you, sit down on this log. This is where we're going to hunt, and you'd have to be quiet.
Yeah.
And I remember you were getting a little stir crazy.
Sure.
And whispering to me, and I'd say, gotta be quiet.
Yeah.
Well, about that time, the brush started snapping.
Right
behind us.
Super crispy.
Super crispy morning.
Frosty morning. The leaves, there was no snow, no nothing.
Every step a deer took sounded like a bomb going off.
Yeah. Not to stop you, but I remember, you were a smoker back then.
Yes.
And I always remembered that you always had a cigarette in your mouth. And I mean, to think about being a smoker at this point as a deer hunter is almost like, it's like one of the number one rules. Don't do that. But I just remember it in the dark of the night before the opener. I just remember the glow of the cigarette embers.
Yeah.
So
anyway, I remember I stood up and I was facing you. You were right here.
Right.
Below me.
Right.
And I told you, don't move, be quiet.
Yeah, because we could hear the footsteps.
You could hear
multiple
Yes.
steps coming through the leaves.
Well, this deer comes through the woods and the brush and the leaves, and all of a sudden it stopped. I don't know if you remember that, but they stopped.
Yeah.
They busted us. And about that time is when I saw that deer.
Yeah.
And
I remember I was facing the complete opposite direction of the deer. So I would have been, say, facing west.
Yes.
The deer were behind me to the east, and you were facing east. And we were just sitting on a log. There was no blinds. There was no blind. We basically just found found like a little log group and
had some brush piled up around us.
Brush piled up around us, and we kicked the leaves out to be quiet. But I remember everything was to my back, so I couldn't see anything. And I just remember being super antsy and wanting to turn around to see the deer. And you just said, "Got to sit still. Got to sit still."
And then that deer stopped, and then he moved his head.
Yeah. How far away was he? Do you remember?
30 yards at the most.
That close.
Oh yeah, very close.
Yeah. And this was opening day, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
That was opening day.
That was opening day.
It was a great day.
Yeah.
For opening season because it was cold.
Super cold.
Everything had frost on it.
Right.
And like I said,
you could hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I kept.
And we were in the hardwoods, so I mean, all the leaves were just as crispy as you could imagine.
We were in hardwoods, a lot of maple, ash.
Yeah.
Some oak.
Yeah.
But all I could see was that deer looking straight at me. I could see his nose, I could see his eyes, I could see his horns.
This was right at daylight? This happened right at daylight, I remember, right? Yeah.
A little after.
Little after. Legal light, anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I kept looking and looking, And finally I could make out his back.
Yeah.
So I just pulled back away from his head and shot. Well,
so he was in a little bit of a dip, right? If
Yes.
I remember right. It
Yes.
was kind of a flat, and then it dropped down into a little lower.
like a little
like
shallow
a bowl.
depression.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I shot, and all I did was I broke his back,
Yeah.
not realizing at that point in time that that's what had happened.
Right.
He took off.
Yeah.
And if you recall, I stepped out away from where we were standing. You were still sitting.
Yeah. I do remember this. I'll remember this till the day I die. I remember saying, "You need to tell me when you're going to shoot because of the boom."
Yeah.
And and you, I had my hands kind of just over my ears so I could hear you, and I kept saying, "You need to tell me when you're going to shoot. You need to tell me when you're going to shoot." And then all of a sudden, boom! And then, of course, then I put my hands over my ears.
Well, that rifle was about that far above your head.
I mean, I was right. Yeah, I was just below it.
I'm here, and you're right here.
Right, just below me.
Yeah.
Or you were just above me, basically.
Yeah, the rifle.
Yeah.
The rifle was
A foot away.
maybe 2 foot away
Right.
when it went off.
Right.
And remember, I stepped away.
Yeah, you basically as soon as you shot, you came off the stand like you were shot out of a cannon.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what the heck was going on because I didn't see any. I was facing the opposite direction.
But you remember, right shortly after that, I froze.
Yeah.
Here's another buck off to my right.
Right, that you never saw.
I didn't even know he was there.
Yeah.
I had the crosshairs on him. I mean, I could have shot him.
Right, at the time, because we could shoot 2 bucks at that time.
No.
Oh, you couldn't?
No.
Oh,
that's the only
shit.
reason I didn't shoot.
Oh, okay.
Well, then he took off,
Yeah.
if you remember,
Yeah.
and I hollered at my buddy, Al.
Yeah,
He
because
was about
we
100
had
yards away.
we were kind of on the north. We were kind of on an old 2-track.
It was an old railroad grade.
Okay,
or
old
logging
railroad.
trail,
Yeah.
actually, is what it was.
Yeah, so like we were set up, and then probably another 200 yards south of us was one of the other
My
hunters.
partners.
Yeah,
Al.
and then another probably maybe 150, 200 yards
Yeah,
beyond
about
him.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I do remember that. Anyway, go ahead.
And remember I told you, I hollered and
Yeah.
said, Al, he's
Yeah.
coming right at you.
Yeah.
Well, then Al started shooting.
Right. He unloaded his gun.
He unloaded. He had a 30-06 automatic.
And he was a terrible shot.
Yeah, that
he
guy
was
couldn't-
blind as a bat. I do
Yeah.
remember that.
He had thick glasses. Yeah. He couldn't have shot a fish in a rain barrel. But that deer's running through the woods, and he's just blasting away until he ran out of shells. And you could hear him down there swearing.
Yeah.
And he's trying to put another clip
Yeah.
in. By
Yeah.
that time, that deer's gone.
long gone.
Actually, it would have been illegal, but I should have shot that buck
Yeah.
and let him tag it.
Sure.
Because I remember I told you, go get Al.
Yeah.
And you went running down
Right.
around the trail to go get him. Well, then I went to see where that deer was
Yeah,
that I shot.
we went back to looking at your deer.
Yeah.
Or, not finding your deer, but your deer was, at the time, we didn't know it, but we had just broke his back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was still going
Yeah.
on his front legs.
Yeah,
His
I
back half was just dragging the ground. And he finally stopped, and I shot him right in here.
Right in the neck. Yeah. Man.
Quite an experience.
That was, I'll remember that till the day I die. That was an 8-point.
Yes.
Yeah. And he had, he didn't have brow tines though, did he?
I don't believe it.
I don't think he did. If I remember right, I don't think he had brow tines. He was 4 on both sides, but no brow tines.
No brow tine.
Not even a,
Probably had, I don't know, maybe a 10-inch spread.
yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It was a good-sized deer.
Yeah.
But not a, well, it was a big rack to me at that time.
Yeah, at the time.
That was a
I mean,
big
I
deer.
remember that was, I mean.
But a couple of years later is when I shot the bigger 8-point
Yeah,
down there.
that's right. That's right.
That one I think had a 16-inch spread.
Yep. Yeah, you had
Big
that one
8-point.
mounted. Yep.
Yeah.
At the time, that was probably the biggest buck I had ever seen.
You.
Whitetail. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That was something.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. So, well, that's pretty much what got me started into hunting from that point on. I know that I dabbled in bow hunting a little bit at the time, and I think we had an old dart and recurve, and it was a left-handed bow, but I shot right-handed. So I didn't, but at the time I didn't really know, I just wanted a bow. So I shot that. Tried to anyway, never shot anything with it, but that's funny. So,
a lot of stories.
Oh man, good times, right?
From those, yes.
Yeah.
Some of the best times of my life.
Yeah.
And the best part of it was that I brought you and your brother out there. That was, to me, was the ultimate.
That's where you kind of come back to the whole tradition thing of deer camp and, and sharing the traditions of deer season and in Michigan. And I don't, maybe other states have that, but I don't know. There's something about Michigan and the deer hunting traditions and the deer camps that those are the things that I always think about and remember. And I hope that people can maybe get back to that. Man, I'm not saying that people aren't into that anymore. I mean, I'm sure there are, but I know that, as far as like we've the mindset is definitely kind of churned from the way you were growing up to, it was a way of life.
Yes.
You weren't big buck hunters. You were just deer hunters.
We were meat hunters.
You were meat hunters, deer hunters. So, I mean, going into today's age, I mean, I totally get where people are coming from on quality deer management and always wanting to better themselves, shoot bigger deer, older age structure and all that stuff. But sometimes I think we get lost in the inches of antlers and forget about what really deer season is all about, and that's spending time with family and friends and it's not always about how big a buck you shoot. Everybody wants to shoot a huge deer, myself included.
Yes.
But I think
camaraderie
is really essential.
The fun staying in a big old tent.
Yeah, whatever we could
scrounge up.
Yeah, that's great.
I went from that old pop-up camper to squad tents, actually.
Yep.
And then from that, there was a couple of years I took that travel trailer.
Yeah.
Out there.
Yeah.
But I miss those days.
Yeah. Those were good times for sure. So.
And back then there was a lot of deer in the Pigeon River.
Yeah, there was.
But they got that herd out there pretty well got decimated because of the that bovine tuberculosis.
Yeah, I remember that.
Literally wiped the deer herd out up there. At one time, 1 year, you could go out there and shoot a buck. You could go back to the nearest sporting goods store.
Yeah.
Buy a doe permit for $3.
Yeah.
Go back out. Shoot a doe.
Shoot another
come
one.
back in, get another license, go back out. They wanted that herd killed off.
Right.
And I remember shooting a doe, and we opened it up, and the insides of that deer's rib cage looked like great big sores about that big around.
That's crazy.
Beet red.
Yeah.
The whole inside of that deer's rib cage was like that.
Wow.
And that was that tuberculosis.
That was that bovine tuberculosis.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So.
Yep.
Come a long ways, haven't we?
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Yes, we
Those
have.
are good memories for sure. So.
Were you out there the year your brother shot that first buck?
Yeah, that was. Yeah, that was funny. You and I were hunting together. I think that might have been the second year. I think I might have been 13 at the time. And
I think so.
And he was sitting on a stand by himself. I think he was 14 or 15.
I'm going to say 15.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was his first buck, I remember. I remember us getting, we heard a gunshot, and we thought it came from his direction, and we started walking down, and we started picking up all the other guys that we hunted with, and everybody was talking, did you hear that shot? Did you hear that shot?
Where'd that come from?
Yeah, it sounded like that came from his direction, and then we happened to come across
a hunter?
Come across another hunter.
Another hunter.
Yeah, and I remember, what did he say?
He said, "Is that your son hunting over there?
Yeah,
just south of the trail?
Is your son named Scott or something like that?"
Yes, that's right. He did. He said, "Your son named Scott." I said, "Yeah." He just said he shot the nicest 8-point I've ever seen.
Yeah. And
if you remember when we walked up on him, he thought he was 12 foot tall.
Oh my gosh, he was puffed up like a freaking peacock. It was Never forget that. He
yeah.
thought he was
Oh boy.
the master hunter. And that was a big buck at the time.
Beautiful buck. Beautiful 8-point buck.
Had never seen a buck
And
that
he shot
big,
it with the
it was a 30-30?
Winchester 30-30
lever action, yeah.
lever action.
Yep.
Model 94. That was the deluxe grade. I can't remember what they called that.
Yeah.
He still has that
Yep,
rifle.
still got it. Still got it.
And the scope.
Yeah.
I think the scope's still on that gun.
Yeah. That's something. So
And of course, that's when I bought you a 270. wasn't it?
No, I had a 30-30.
That's right, you
Yep.
did. Yeah,
I had
you had
same,
a 30-30.
Yep, I had a 30-30. Same thing. So, yep. So,
Well, that's actually when I turned. I think I was 15, maybe 16.
yeah.
I bought a Model 94 Winchester pre-64 from, it was called Vlad Sporting Goods in Kalkaska.
Okay.
And I used to go in there every Saturday when my dad went to town to buy groceries. And I always would walk downtown.
Yeah.
And I'd go in that store. And I remember standing there looking at all the guns up on that rack and looking at the 30-30s. And I loved them. I just thought that was the gun.
Right.
And Mr. Vlad, he was an older gentleman. I bet he was probably in his 60s.
Yeah.
And he knew my dad real well.
Sure.
And I used, like I said, every Saturday I was in there. And he said to me one day, he said, young man, he said, you want to look at one of them? And I said, yeah, I would like to buy one.
Yeah.
And he said, well, which one do you want? And I remember saying, Mr. Vlad, you know what the good one is. That's the one I want.
Right.
Well, he did. He picked out one.
Yeah.
And he laid it on the counter. And I oohed and ahed and stuttered and stammered. And
Yeah.
I was scared to death because I really, it was the first gun that I ever bought.
Sure.
$65.
$65.
Yeah. And the down payment was $5. Well, I had $5 or $6 on it.
Right.
And I remember handing him that $5 and I was shaking.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe it. I'm buying this gun.
Right.
I didn't even tell my dad.
Yeah. So you were 15 years old.
I think 15.
Yeah. Buying a gun.
Buying a gun.
You do that now. Well, that's just not even. Yeah. You're trying to do something like that right now. Well, it's 100% illegal, but
Yeah.
yeah.
But he was a pure gentleman, that guy. He said, now, Mr. Tanner, I expect you to be in here every Saturday
Yeah.
until you till that gun is paid off.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I did to get the $5, but I remember going down to my grandma's and I did anything.
Right.
I'd go out to the barn and shovel manure.
Right.
And my grandpa Lawrence would pay me $2-3.
Right.
As soon as I got $5, I'd wait till the next Saturday, beat feet back in that store, lay her on the table.
Here on the table.
He'd write out he had his little receipt thing.
Yep.
It was a card
Sure.
with my name on it and $65.
Right.
And he'd deduct $5.
Deduct $5 every time you brought it
Well,
in.
the last $5 that I walked in there with to pay him,
Yeah.
I put it up there and I said, I'm ready to take the gun. I got the $5 to pay it
Right.
off. He just grinned. And he said, well, Mr. Tanner, and again, I'm 15.
Right.
Well, Mr. Tanner, you've been such a good at paying this rifle off. Here's your $5 back. And then he handed me a box of 30-30s.
Oh, man.
So I paid $60 for this pre-64 30-30 carbine
Yeah.
with a box of shells.
Yeah. What's that gun worth now?
I've been told over $1,000.
Wow. That's something.
And like a dummy, I sold that.
Well, how would you know? You know?
Yeah, back then. I mean, I needed money
Right.
for something. I don't even remember what it was, but I needed some money, so I sold it to a kid I went to school with for $75.
$75. $15 profit.
And to this day, I have asked this guy every time he sees me.
Yeah.
He said, "No, that gun is not for sale. Get away from me." He won't sell it back to me, but he still has it. That was his first rifle,
Oh, man.
and he shot his first deer with that rifle.
Yeah.
I can tell you some stories about that rifle.
Sure. Yeah.
I can tell you that there were more illegal deer shot than there were legal.
Maybe we'll say that for another time.
So, okay.
Yeah.
We could write a book.
We could write a book. Yeah, we could write a book, but we could talk about it too.
Yes.
Let's save it for another episode.
Save it for another episode.
Good
Be
times.
happy to do that.
For sure. All right, guys. Well, we're just over an hour into this whole podcast thing. Dad, I appreciate you doing this. This was a lot of fun, buddy.
My pleasure.
All right. So, anyways, if you guys like this episode, go in, give it a 5-star review if you would. Share it with your friends. And like I said, you can listen to this on pretty much any platform, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So I hope you enjoyed it. And like I said, leave a comment on what you liked about it. And we are going to try and maybe try and get back together here sometime down the road. We'll tell some more stories and kind of reminisce a little bit. So, but anyway, thanks again, guys, for listening to the Mic'd Up Outdoors podcast, and we will talk to you all very soon. Take care.